All right, welcome back to the Elias Makos Show. Now, the Canadian Party of Quebec is holding a panel on August 14th to discuss the potential creation of an 11th province in this country. And yeah, that 11th province would include Montreal. Let's talk about it. Let's find out if it's even doable. Colin Standish and Myrtis Fossey join us on the line. They're both co-leaders of the Canadian Party of Quebec. Colin, Myrtis, welcome to the program.
Hi, Elias. Thanks for having us.
Hi, Elias. Thanks.
Great to talk to you both. Colin, I'll start with you. So I saw this event is happening. Why are you doing it? Obviously you want to discuss an 11th province here, but what leads you to say this is a solution that needs to be looked at?
Yeah, no, thanks, Elias. So we're really in an unspoken constitutional crisis at this point in time, right? That during Meats Lake, Charlottetown Accord, the two referenda, people were engaged from coast to coast to coast, but right now, cloak and dagger, our Constitution is being amended willy-nilly. So actually just last week, I and others were informed that the Canadian Constitution was updated with Bill 96, the Oath Act and the Saskatchewan First Act, which are, from our perspective, illegitimate constitutional amendments that the federal government has rolled over and played dead once again to actually let provinces amend the federal Constitution without proper amending procedures. We see Bill 96, Bill 21, and Bill 40 continue to be applied, right? So there's a variety of judgments and court cases ongoing, but we saw with the recent healthcare scandal in Quebec that people being turned away unless they can prove their English language eligibility. It's shameful, and the federal government has been derelict in their duty, and that includes all federal Liberal MPs, particularly ones on the island of Montreal, who are often members of cabinet or very influential in the government, have turned up their nose at representing their constituents' best interests. So we, the Canadian Party, recently did a press conference on Parliament Hill to speak truth to power, to inject the idea of having, a third referendum, before there's a third referendum, having a federally administered referendum in Quebec to let people choose, do you want to remain and stay Canadian, or, if there is another referendum, to go with that, how that is determined. And then as well, if push came to shove, that an actual 11th province to look at the viability of it. And from our perspective, with international law, domestic law, it is viable, it is legal, and so we're studying the issue, and we want to highlight it for all Quebecers and Canadians.
All right, let's talk about that legality and international law for a bit. And Myrtis, let me tell you something. This was many, many months ago, much earlier in the year. I simply broached the subject on Twitter. About how, hey, listen, if Canada is divisible, perhaps Quebec is divisible.
Right.
Nationalists, and I've got a lot of nationalist followers on Twitter. Quebecers love me, but those of which who are separatist, boy, did they lose their minds at the suggestion that Quebec is divisible. They were steadfast that international law wouldn't allow it. So let's talk about that. Are we looking at something that maybe isn't even possible?
The fact of the matter is that we do hear a lot about this idea about the territory being unchangeable and that they get to kind of do what they want. The problem is that you have to actually abide by the laws of the country for you to have those protections. So one of the things that happens is, for instance, because Quebec is making use of the notwithstanding clause, they essentially are bypassing the very laws that protect them to have their territory unchanged. And so their territory actually can be changed because they're not really playing by the rules. Colin should probably speak to this more so than I should. But essentially what we're doing is we're saying, look, if you guys can bypass the rules, so can we. And why should we essentially be looking at a situation where people who live in Quebec and who want to retain their Canadian status, why should we suddenly be forced to be refugees and to leave and to flee Quebec when Quebec is not, in fact, a territory that can be unchanged? Further to this, I believe Colin should speak to this, but for instance, Labrador isn't recognized appropriately, and so there's all kinds of territorial claims that actually are very, very unclear. And so this is exactly why we want to ask for a referendum before the referendum so that we know what would be involved. And this speaks to informed consent. Before you do anything, before you vote on anything or decide about anything, you need to know exactly what it is you're talking about. And it may be that Quebecers, even those who are separatists, might find that if the territory can in fact be changed, they won't be so keen for separation because they may lose the very things that they value the most.
And speaking of that, let's talk about what could be lost here with Myrtis Fossey and Colin Standish, both co-leaders of the Canadian Party of Quebec. Colin, just from your perspective, what would the territory be? You know, would it just be Island of Montreal? I would think if I'm from the negotiation standpoint of Canada, because to me, all of this would have to involve negotiation. Even if there was a referendum and the yes side won, the Quebec referendum and nationalist separatists got their way, there would have to be some negotiation. What would the territory look like?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, that's a very hypothetical question. I think Myrtis pointed out it's quite fascinating. I don't know if you and your listeners know, but Labrador is not considered, it's considered a part of Quebec by the Quebec government. If you look at Quebec government map, there's actually a broken line with JCPC 1927. So there's a British ruling at the time, but so the Quebec government doesn't even recognize Labrador as being part of Newfoundland. So there's a lot of questions at the table. But regarding, potential negotiations, so there's a lot of fascinating constitutional issues at play, right? Because the municipalities are creatures of the province, right? We saw that with the sort of demerger debacles and all this in Quebec, but every municipality in Quebec could be abolished overnight by the National Assembly if they really wanted to, and merge it all into one municipality. There's not really a legal status for municipalities, but as well with a federal referendum to have different districts, whether they be federal electoral districts or municipalities, to actually have votes to actually sort of focus in on where people who want to remain Canadian steadfastly, no matter what the rest of the status of Quebec is. So where would those borders look like? That's hypothetical. I think it would be very interesting to see, certainly Montreal, but I know myself here, I live in the townships. I'm very proud Canadian, as are my neighbors and friends, English and French speaking. So, I think you see a lot of parts, certainly the north as well, Nunavik, where I was partly raised in Kuujjuaq. And I know that many Inuits are very proud Canadians, as they are proud Quebecers as well. But I think you would see a lot of the north, you would see a lot of western Quebec, the eastern townships, the Gas Bay, lower North Shore, that are many parts are majority English speaking to this day. I imagine many of those would remain Canadian. But of course, as we know, Francophones are proud Federalists and Canadians as well. So I think you would see some very interesting votes if they were allowed to who wants to remain Canadian and when and where and how.
Myrtis, for our listeners who are already running to the T-shirt shop to print 11th Province T-shirts, tell us about next week. So it's Wednesday, August 14th. What do you hope? Yeah.
So it'll be held in Montreal West Town Hall in the evening, 7 to 9. And what we're hoping to do is really discuss all of these issues and present some ideas we have. And it's really turning around this idea of, if Quebec is if Canada's divisible, so is Quebec. What would that look like? What do people want? We have some precedent set, either the Swiss model, if you saw our press release, and if we look at what the Indigenous populations have done, they've in fact have their Canadian recognition. So in the event of a separation, they're protected. And so we have a lot of fodder here to discuss really those Quebecois who want to stay Canadian. We have options, and we want to figure out what those options are. And we also want to listen to what other people do want. And so this is an open panel, and we're hoping to have discussions. I will be there, Colin will be there, and one of our advisors, Keith Henderson, former Equality Party. And so I think this is going to be really interesting for people, and I think it gives hope.
And if people want to go, do they have to sign up anywhere, RSVP? What do they, if they just show up, how does that work?
There's an RSVP. They should check out again all our socials, Canadian Party of Quebec.ca, and they'll be able to find all the information they need about how to sign up, when and where. They can reach out to us pretty much directly that way. And I'm really just looking forward to hear what people have to say and to give people hope, and to know that we have options, and we shouldn't be afraid of a pending third referendum.
Colin, Myrtis, we have to leave it there. I want to thank you both for your time this morning.
Thank you so much, Elias.
Colin Standish, Myrtis Fossey, both co-leaders of the Canadian Party of Quebec.